Good Monday morning, everybody. We're back after a long vacation time and had some good times over Christmas. And of course, as you can hear from our nasal passages, we've also had some illnesses running through the church staff and really the church family and everyone. So um, just everybody be careful about that. But we're glad to be back here on Monday morning and for Rewind. And we've got actually a question that was submitted to Pastor Eddie, and so we're gonna talk about a hot topic today, and it's really one that I'm glad to hear that other people are thinking about, concerned about, noticed about, because sometimes if you're the only one noticing something, you wonder, is the problem me? Um, but someone else has noticed this, and that is, why are churches in decline? And I would probably, I guess we could say, churches in America, churches really in our region, why are they in decline? And so we were talking about it a little before. There's a lot of answers, but Pastor Eddie has kind of narrowed them down for us into a few main topics. So go ahead and jump into that.
Yeah, I've had a lot more time to think about it than Pastor Stewart has. Although we've talked about this and thought about this a lot, obviously in ministry and seeing the trends over the past several years, the sharp decline in the convention. I'm just going to deal with the Southern Baptist Convention. Let's deal with our own, not with
Right.
everybody else. But the latest statistics out of our convention for this past year is 81.5% of our churches are plateaued or declining. Now, the way they come up with those things is a 5-year period. So if you haven't grown at all numerically in attendance in a 5-year period, then you are considered plateaued. If you have lost attendance over a 5-year period, then you are classified as declining. So a 5-year period is the mark that they use. So it's not just a one-off thing. It's a period of time of 5 years. So 81.5% of our churches are either plateaued or declining. Now, those declining are more than those that have plateaued. Only 18.5% of our churches, that means, are growing. And here's the amazing statistic of that. Of the 18.5%, and I wish I had the raw numbers, but of the 18.5% that are growing, 65% of those are churches that are younger than 10 years old. In other words, the younger the church, the more apt that it's growing. The older the church, the more apt that it's plateaued or declining. That's the numbers through the Southern Baptist Convention. So that tells us a little bit about something of church decline. Here's another statistic that I think we need to hear. According to Gallup, only 20% of Americans attend church on a weekly basis. So that means 1 in 5 Americans will go to church on a weekly basis. All right. The average right now for a church member to attend is about 2 services a month. Mm-hmm. All right. And that number is getting wider as we go on. So, like Stuart said, it's a ton of reasons that we could come up with of why churches are declining and things that we've seen and experienced. And I think we've got a relatively good amount of experience in churches and looking at trends and things like that. But I've just narrowed it down to 4 very simple, basic reasons that I think churches are declining to answer this individual's question. Number 1, churches with a majority of older people are declining. It's just the way it is. I mean, if you've got an older congregation, you've got nobody coming behind it. Obviously, eventually, with age comes death, and churches are dying off because they're not reaching the next generation. They're not looking out to build the church for a long haul. They're just trying to circle the wagons and keep what they got, not lose any more than they have to. So churches that are declining are really churches that have a majority of older people. Now, there's nothing wrong with being old. I'm not saying that's the reason.
We're getting there.
I'm just, we're getting there. And listen, I've tried to reverse the process and I hadn't figured it out yet. So I don't think there's anything we can do about getting older. It's just going to happen. That's the natural result of things. But the problem is if you don't have people coming up behind you, then eventually that church is going to die out because it's predominantly older. So it's not a necessarily a slack against older people. It's just the fact that if there's nobody coming up behind them, then there's a problem. And that's what we're seeing in a lot of churches. And we're experiencing that here. I'm not just saying that out in general. That's one of our issues is we've got a predominantly older congregation age-wise, and we've lost an entire generation in between there, and we're trying to do our best to get that generation back. But that's just the reality of what things are. Now, this shouldn't surprise us because just for instance, I looked up Revelation chapter 2, the letter to the church at Ephesus. And we all know this story, this letter to this church. He says, I know your works, your labor, your endurance. You cannot tolerate evil people. You have tested those who call themselves apostles and are not, and you have found them to be liars. In other words, these are good folks at the church at Ephesus. They're they got good works, they labor, they endure. They've been tested. They've tested others to make sure they're of the faith. They love Jesus. They love the Bible studies. They love coming to church. That could be said of almost every church in America. All right. But what happens? He says, I have this against you, that you've abandoned or left the love you had at first. And then he says, remember how far you have fallen, repent, do the works you did at first. Now, what were the works that the church at Ephesus did at first? Well, to know that, you got to go to the book of Acts. And Acts chapter 19 talks about this church at Ephesus. And I think this is what John is referring to when he tells them to return back to their works. What was going on at Ephesus? Well, Bible says in Acts chapter 19, verse 11, that God was performing extraordinary miracles through the hands of Paul. So much so that they were taking napkins and having him touch them, and people were being healed from sick. But even the people at Ephesus, it says that there were evil spirits that were being driven out. It says the Ephesus, both Jews and Greeks, they became afraid, and the name of the Lord Jesus was held in high esteem. It got to the point to where there was even a riot in Ephesus because of what was being taught and the conversions that were happening. The people there that were pagans, that were losing their livelihood, were getting mad, and it was causing a riot in the streets. John refers back to that, and he says, remember what you did at first. They were putting everything on the line for the gospel. They were putting everything on the line for the gospel. They weren't holding anything back. They were taking every risk that they could in order to get the gospel out, to the point that the way, as it refers to, had grown so much that it was causing a riot in the streets of Ephesus, because Ephesus was a Roman colony under Roman authority, and the Romans didn't like that. And so they knew that they were going to be persecuted because of that. So they risked everything for the sake of the gospel. Now, here's the reality that we need to hear as a church. Young people will go to church, all right? If they're not coming to your church, there's something wrong with your church. Young people are attending church in record numbers now. It's not that they don't want to come, it's whether we want them to come and whether we have what they need when we get here. So I think if you've got a congregation predominantly of older people, the first question we need to ask is, what are we doing that is not making young people feel welcome? What are we doing that's relaying to them that they're not welcome? Now, all of us would say we want young people. Mm-hmm. But really what we're saying is we want young people who will come in and do exactly what we're doing, mm-hmm. because we don't want to change anything in the way we're doing things. And I get that, because as you get older, you get set in your ways. I have a routine that I go through on a regular basis. When I was in my former life, I tried everything I could do not to have a routine because I didn't want to be predictable. I've gotten predictable as I get older. So I'm starting to understand that. And listen, I also understand in talking to some senior adults, everything in this culture today is confusing to them.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
You can't even go to a television now and just turn on the TV and watch something. You got to go to an app or something like that to be able to watch TV. My gosh, I get in my truck and I've got a key, but it's of no value. I got to push a button to start my car. You know, if I go to work on it, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nothing like what it used to be. So we're living in a culture today where everything has changed. But here's what we need to understand as younger folks. Well, I'm sort of in the middle, but what we need to understand about senior adults is the one thing that they have that is constant is church. Because church today is like it was 20 years ago to them. And they like that because it's the only thing in their life that's constant. Now, I had to learn that. I didn't understand that at first, but in talking to senior adults, that's what I've learned. That's what I get out of talking with them because I hear that over and over again. Everything in the culture is completely changed, but my one constant is church. I know that there it's going to be like it always has been. That's the problem. we are dug into that. And listen, this is going to sound harsh, but this is the way it is. We have made that into an idol. Satan has made that into an idol for us because we have gotten so comfortable and we want to keep it just the way it always has been. And we've lost sight, hear me, we've lost sight of what the church is here for. It's not for the membership. It's not for the saints. It's for the ain'ts. It's for those out there who don't know Christ. The whole mission of the church is to make disciples. If we've already got disciples and we've already made them, we're not focused on them. We're supposed to focus on making more disciples, which means we got to go outside the walls of the church. And that's why churches in a community, a long life church like ours, 1909, the community has turned over from what it used to be 30 or 40 years ago, and the church hasn't caught up to it. And that's why we're not reaching communities anymore, and that's why churches are declining. So I would just say this. We've got to get past our comfortability, our consistency, making it into an idol, and we've got to get outside of our walls and realize, hey, wait a minute, we got to reach this community that we've been put here to reach. And that's what the church did years ago, but it stopped doing that. And we come up with every excuse in the world, whether it's gated communities and people don't like you knocking on their doors, but we haven't replaced it with anything. We haven't found another way to engage the culture in which the church lives. And I think it's one of the main reasons why we see churches declining. Any thoughts on that one?
I was just going to say something about the senior adults and the change process that they have experienced. And yeah, I acknowledge that. I've seen, change in my lifetime. But what I like to do with them is encourage them the change that they have made it through. I mean, they've made it through more change than I have.
Oh, yeah.
We've had some of our fellows here that retired from the telephone company, and then just talking with them in passing, they talk about going from, they just climbed the pole, put on the spurs, climbed the pole and did the thing, when they started, all the way to fiber when they retired. And so just that massive transition that they saw, and they handled it. And, change is always going to keep happening, but I just want to encourage them to understand you guys have handled a lot of change already, and you can still do it. And that's one thing I look at, like my parents, and even my grandparents, and the change that they saw and they adapted to in technology, in automobiles, planes, et cetera, telecommunications, and they continue to adapt. But again, it's a mindset of, well, this is comfortable, yes, and maybe in our little group we can have it like that, but in order for things to keep going on, keep growing, it's going to have to change. And we're going to be there one day. We're going to be like, well, why can't we go back to laptops? Well, no, you have to use this now, but I like my old laptop.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just let me encourage, the senior adults that are listening, you guys have, you're pioneers. I mean, you're technical pioneers, and so you can handle this, and you can do it like Pastor Eddie said, for the cause of the gospel, and not making it an idol.
Yeah. And here's what we need to understand as well. After you and I are gone, if the Lord tarries, the next generation coming up behind us is going to have it far worse than we do. I mean, they're going to deal with more
Oh yeah,
animosity, more hatred, more battles than we have ever faced. And if we haven't trained that next generation to be able to take over the church and be the church, then we're going to be putting them up in a very difficult situation. So just keep those things in mind. The number 2 thing I put down was churches that focus on minor issues. They make the minor the major. Okay. What do you mean, Pastor Eddie? Well, I mean, I could give you a litany of things. What color the carpet's going to be? What color the paint's going to be in the sanctuary? The decorations that are going to be there. The decor. Whether we're going to have, pews or chairs, or whether we're going to have organ or no organ. All these things. None of that impacts lostness, and none of that impacts discipleship. Which is what the 2 things we ought to be most concerned about over anything else. And a lot of that comes from polity of the church, who gets to say, who doesn't get to say, how decisions are made. Fighting over the bylaws, what needs to be in the bylaws, what doesn't need to be in the bylaws. Everything seems to be a knee-jerk reaction instead of being proactive. We are reactive about everything, and everything goes out for a vote, and everybody feels like they got to have their say because we're this democracy, and we're pure congregationalism is what I'm talking about. And it leads to chaos. It leads to, I don't know any other way to say it, but it leads to people who are spiritually immature making spiritual decisions or being able to put a stop to a spiritual decision because of something that's raised in a conference or a business meeting or whatever you refer to your family meetings as, or whatever church meetings as. But and what our question should be is, what is our ministry footprint in this community? That should be the overriding, arching thing of what we do, not focusing on the minor things and belittling those to the point to where we're getting upset with one another and we're picking teams and choosing sides over something that's not going to make a hill of beans 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, or 15 years from now. And in doing that, we get off track. We lose focus of what really is important, and that is, how is this impacting discipleship, and how is this impacting lostness in the community in which God has planted us and put us here to reach? I think that may even be above number 1 that I mentioned, but that's certainly things that I've seen in the church. I think everybody has seen that in the church. More people leave the church over a church business meeting than any other reason that is given for relocating churches, because they brought up something, they didn't get their way, or they just couldn't handle the animosity that was at every business meeting or whatever, and they just got turned off to it. And folks, listen, we have lost an entire generation because of that in the church, because they don't have time for that. They got too much stuff going on. They live in a culture that is so rapidly moving.
Yeah.
To spend time to come to a conference or a business meeting to sit there and argue about the color of a carpet or whatever, it just doesn't mean anything to them. It's not relevant to them, and it's not impacting their lives. So why show up and do it? And that's why we don't see young people at conferences. That's why we don't see young families coming to a business meeting in a church, because they know what it's going to be like, and they don't want any part of it. They don't have time for it. And unfortunately, it gets to the point where they just say, well, if that's the way it's going to be, I'll go somewhere else. And that's why we're seeing trends in church life moving away from those. I know many churches now that only have one conference a year.
Right.
And that's basically just to approve the budget and move on.
Right.
And that's it. That's the only thing that's discussed. We do quarterly here. That's sort of a middle road kind of approach. At least it's not every month.
I have been in the monthly ones.
I have too. But we're progressing in that realm. But anyway, that we need to understand that when we get so focused on the minor stuff that's all we're sitting around talking about, we're missing the big picture. We're missing the forest for the trees, and we're not doing what we're called to do.
Yeah, because like you say, this younger generation, they can go on YouTube and they can hear a million different talking
Yeah.
heads giving a different opinion on the same subject, and both of them saying they're right. So, they hear too much of that.
Yeah.
And because and they just basically they've turned a deaf ear to it. We're just writing you off, cutting you out, or so to speak. But now I would venture to say if you had a training day here on how you can be equipped to do ministry next month at the homeless shelter, they would probably show up because they see worth in that. They see value in that. I'm going to sacrifice this segment of time because next month I'm going to be able to help, this group of people and keep ongoing helping them. They'll see worth in that. But to come and, discuss what a committee has already discussed for probably a couple months and then, vote on it, they're not going to see the value in that.
Yeah. I think I read this week or last week, the youngest or the oldest millennial will be 45 in 2024. And the oldest, what is it, Gen X after that? I think I'm right on that. Gen X, it will be 25 in 2024. That's the future of the church. And whether you are experiencing this or not in your church, millennials are coming back to the church. But what they're coming back to is something that is real. They don't listen. Everybody thinks that the millennials want the smoke and the blacked out. No. They're past that. They're wanting something that's real, something that is relevant, something that they can get involved in and make a difference in. That's what they want to do. They want to make a difference. And Gen X is even more so that way. Mm-hmm. So this idea that we got to have a rock band and we got to have everything blacked out and we got to have all this new trendy stuff. No. They're going away from that. That's not what they're looking for. They're looking for something that's relevant, something that's good, but something they can get involved in and make a difference in. Mm-hmm. They're not interested in meetings. They're not interested in all this other stuff. They want to know, what can I do with little time I've got to impact the kingdom of God and be a force for that. They're not concerned about all the fluff stuff. And that's where we're missing it a lot in the church. A lot of churches have gone the other way and said, hey, we're just strictly entertainment. We're trying to draw a crowd. And they're declining because of that, because the next generation is not looking for that. They're looking for something that's got value and meaning because they want to make a difference in the world. They want to have a footprint there. When I was thinking about this, I thought about Timothy, 1 Timothy. And here's what Paul says to Timothy in 1 Timothy, verse 3, chapter 1. I urge you, when I went to Macedonia, remain in Ephesus so that you may instruct certain people not to teach false doctrine or to pay attention to myths and endless genealogies. Now, that's not what we're seeing in the church, but this is. These promote speculations rather than God's plan, which operates by faith. Now, the goal of our instruction is love that comes from a pure heart, a good conscience, and a sincere faith. Some have departed from these and turned aside to fruitless discussion. That's what we're talking about. Fruitless discussion.
Yes.
They want to be teachers of the law, although they do not understand what they are saying or what they are insisting on. But we know that the law is good, provided no one uses it legitimately. So what is he telling Timothy there? He said, Timothy, I want you to stay in Ephesus because there's false teachers that are there. They need to be rebuked. There's people that needs to be instructed that against this false doctrine. And they're doing all kinds of other things. But listen, what I really want you to be there for is people are departing from the truth and sitting around talking about fruitless things that don't amount to anything, that aren't going to impact the kingdom. And so I need you to be there to make sure that doesn't happen. And what are we seeing in our world today? That's exactly what we're seeing in the church. We sit around talking about fruitless discussions that have no impact on the kingdom, no impact on discipleship, no impact on lostness. And to make ourselves feel good, and I think you mentioned this morning before we went on air, to make ourselves feel good, we make ourselves real busy to pat ourselves on the back and say, well, we're offering this, we're doing this gimmick, we're doing that gimmick. but we're not really doing ministry. We're having events, but we're not doing ministry with the events. Nothing wrong with events as long as you're doing ministry in the event. We've got to get back to doing ministry when we have things that we're inviting people to and taking part in. But I would say that, churches majority of older people, and churches that focus on the minor issues instead of the major issues. Number 3, I think we're running out of time here. Churches that do not impact or invest in their community. I think that's a declining church. That's going to be a church that's on the decline. We drive to church, we get out of our cars, we go inside, we do our religious thing, we get back in our cars, and we go home. That's church to most people. It's something we do. We check off the box. We gave that hour to come. We came on campus. We experienced it. We went home, and that's as deep as far as we get. My question is, if the church closes the doors tomorrow, will anybody in the community know it? Mm-hmm. That's the question that ought to dog us. That's the question that ought to keep us up at night. If we close the doors tomorrow, would anybody notice that we were gone, that we weren't open anymore? They're just going to drive by, see the church. Eventually the church will deteriorate. They'll say, well, they must not be meeting there anymore. But what impact are we making on the community? What investment are we making in the community to reach people for Christ so that they know, and listen, that they rely upon us, that they say, hey, if they're gone, we're going to miss something here. It's going to impact our community because that church is no longer meeting. And you may think that's a pipe dream, but no, it's really not. There are churches that are so involved in their communities that if they close the doors, the community is going to say, wait a minute, what can we do to help keep you open? Mm-hmm. It's just not their reality. So we've got to get to that point to where we're impacting the community by investing in the community with what we're doing. Matthew 6:19 says, where your heart is, there your treasure will be also. If you've got a heart for lost people, you got a heart for people coming to know Christ, you got a heart for the next generation, you're going to invest in that. You're going to be out there talking to people in the community, inviting them to church, figuring out ways to get involved in the community. You're going to be looking at Facebook. If that area has a Facebook page, finding out what some of the needs are, find out what people are talking about, what needs to be done, what doesn't need to be done, getting ideas from people of how we can impact the community, how we can use our resources to impact the community. But listen, most churches nowadays, and this is just reality, we're in self-preservation mode. We've circled the wagons. We're trying to take care of buildings instead of taking care of people, instead of reaching people. We're trying to find funds to put back together things that have been broken for a period of time, because buildings are deteriorating, campuses are deteriorating, and we spend more money on maintenance and trying to take care of what we already got instead of impacting a community. And there's where we fail. And we've done it so long, we have forgotten. We don't even see it anymore. We just know, hey, we got a building that needs this. We got to put it in there. Well, that's just money that went out the door that could have used.
And it's not just money, it's time.
It's time.
Yeah, because normally we have volunteers doing that work, and instead of being out there ministering, they're here working on the structure.
Yeah. And it's not just the work. It's programs, it's committee meetings, it's things like that we invest so much time and effort in, again, that isn't really impacting lostness or discipleship.
Yeah, I would sacrifice a committee meeting a night for a Bible study somewhere out there at your house.
Absolutely. Yep. All right, number 4, moving right along, churches that develop a pattern of inflexibility. This is my favorite. What is inflexibility? We've never done it that way before. Or we've tried that one time and it didn't work. So why try it again? Henry Blackaby probably had the greatest impact on my life in experiencing God. His famous quote was, find out where God is at work and join him. We've lost that. We're not trying to find out where God's at work. We're trying to take care of ourselves. We're trying to do what we want to do, the way we want to do it. and God's not even in the picture. We're not asking the question, where is God working around us, and then getting involved. We're just coming up with our own things. Let's try this. Let's try this. Let's try it. It's almost like throwing, mud at a wall. Let's just see what it makes. But here's the difference between young churches and older churches. The way I revert everything to sports. All right. So I think a church is supposed to be like a middle linebacker. All right. What does a middle linebacker do? Middle linebacker stands in the middle of the field. He surveys everything. His head's on a swivel. He's on the balls of his feet, and he's ready to change directions wherever he needs to do it. He doesn't know where the play's going, but he's ready to go left. He's ready to go right. He's ready to go up the middle. It doesn't matter. He's ready to drop back. Whatever the situation comes at him, he's ready to react to it, and then he's going to attack it. Well, when you get so bogged down in minutia in a church that you can't react and do something when you need to do it, that's a problem. Mm-hmm. Younger churches don't have the minutia. They don't have all the, the bells and the whistles, the hoops to jump through, to make a decision or whatever. They just make the decision. They just pivot when they need to pivot. They see a need, they go after the need. They see a situation, they take care of the situation. They don't have to have a meeting to do that. They don't have to have everybody's approval to do that. And when I say that, I'm thinking of Numbers chapter 13. What is Numbers chapter 13? This is Moses sending the 12 spies into the promised land. And we know that Joshua and Caleb go in with that 12, and they come back out and they say, hey, it's just like God said it was going to be. Mm-hmm. And here's some fruit from the land.
They even brought back evidence.
Brought back evidence. They're the only ones that presented evidence. And then you got the 10, who I would call the majority, comes back, 10 versus 2, that's the majority. And they say, yes, all that's true, but these guys are huge. And there's no way we can do this. There's no way we could. They've lost sight of the fact that God has already said, I'm going to give this to you. It's yours.
They've agreed that what God said is actually true, but.
Yes. And they saw the evidence, but then they reverted back and said, we can't do it. There's just no way we can do this. There's no way we can do this. The defeatist mentality is what I call it. And listen, if you sit back and say, we can't do this, you're never going to do it. Mm-hmm. You're never going to do it. We need a lot more Joshuas and Calebs that say, hey, I don't care what the majority says. This is what God has said to do, and we got to go do it. And that's not always popular, and I get that. I get that better than anybody. But that's what we got to do. That's what leadership does. It sees where God is at work. It pivots. It does what needs to be done, and then we'll ask for forgiveness later. I mean, that's just the reality. And churches that are growing are the churches that are doing that, not waiting a month to have a meeting to discuss it and see if we got financing for it and what it's going to take to pull it off, and if it's going to take to pull it off, and you end up having an hour meeting talking about the pros and the cons, and then nothing gets done. And you've missed your window of opportunity. That's what happens more than anything else, is you had a short window of opportunity that you could have made an impact, but because you couldn't pull the trigger, you couldn't take that step, you lose that opportunity. Churches that are inflexible lose the opportunity. We've got to be flexible in what we do in order to be successful in ministry.
And the truth is, the Church of Jesus Christ is going to exist to the end. Each of us, all of us as believers, we have a certain amount of days here on this earth. Yep. You can spend them, like I say, in the muck and the mire of meetings and all like that. Yeah, some meetings are okay. Or you can spend the majority of that time that you have on this earth in boots on the ground ministry, whatever that is for you. I mean, it may not be hands-on ministry per se, as I think of it. For me, it's the disaster relief, rebuild, social justice ministries, things like that, things where you are boots on the ground. But it would be far better to exert the majority of your time focus on those events and less on, like you say, circling the wagons, being inflexible. No, we can't do it that way, because and this is always one of my pet peeves, and then along that journey, looking back and seeing who you can grab with you and take on that journey. It's like I told the youth yesterday, there's always going to be somebody coming behind me that can excel over me in abilities and things they can do, whatever it is. but I should never let them excel me in my character. But yet, what I should do then is reach back and find that person, mentor them, disciple them to, if you will, take my place or take my place in general, so that, as you say, when we're gone, there's somebody left that they had the gifts and abilities, but I was able to pour character into them and wisdom into them and get them prepared for the, just like Moses and then Joshua. Joshua took on after Moses. So, I think that's some things in church we think we're going to be here forever, but we're not.
Right.
And so we have got to prepare the next generation while we're still here, and we can hopefully pass on the good and warn them from the bad, but prepare them for that leadership.
Well, I think everyone who's in a church right now is there because somebody invested something in them, or you wouldn't be there. I mean, somebody had to share the gospel with you. Somebody had to invite you to go to church, or something. Maybe you grew up in church all your life. That's wonderful. But the majority of the people today, somebody reached out and grabbed them and brought them into the church. So you are a product of what we're talking about. You've got to reach back and grab that next generation. You've got to make disciples who in turn make disciples, so the church can reproduce itself. Yes, the church is going to be here until Christ comes. We know that. The gates of hell will not prevail against Christ's church. But we're to make that church as big as we can before he comes, not see how little we can get it.
And use every gift you've got that he's given
everything. That's right. Money, talents, time, everything we've got. And again, what are we laying up in heaven? Are we laying up wood, hay, straw? Are we laying up gold and silver? I mean, are we laying up things that are going to last? Or are we just going through the motions? And churches are declining because we're not laying up the right kind of treasure. But hey, I tried my best to answer the question in a short amount of time. Like I said, there's probably 15 or 20 others that I could throw out right away easily. But I just tried to pick the top four I think that would impact people the most and make us think a little bit, and give some background with scripture with it as well. So if you got any thoughts, let us know. If you got another topic that you'd like for us to talk about, then by all means, we're looking for new material all the time, and we'd like to talk about something you want to talk about more than what we want to talk about. So give us those ideas, and I thank you for the question today. And that came from a person who's visiting our church, who we got into a good discussion with, and he said, why don't you put this on your thing and answer this for everybody? And I said, well, I think that's a great idea. So you got suggestions, let us know.
All right. We'll see everybody Wednesday night.